Hey everybody, welcome to the Klein-Esopus Kill, a beautiful little stream in Ulster County. We can hear the rushing water as it travels downhill. Just about a half mile downhill from here, it enters the Hudson River. So this would be considered one of the tributaries of the Hudson River. Now, we've talked a little bit about the estuary ecosystem, and we've talked about how, there's fresh water and salt water in the estuary. And it's pretty clear that the salt water comes from the Atlantic Ocean, right? But where does the fresh water come from? So when you talk about the fresh water, you're talking about the watershed, okay? Now, a lot of people are like, watershed? That sounds like a building where you keep water. But no, you can think of it more of it like kind of like how, a dog sheds its hair maybe or something like that. But it's basically about the draining of water downhill. So when it rains, the water will travel downhill, and any little creek or stream can have a watershed. So if you have like a pond or a stream in your backyard, that little area, that little pond has a watershed. So there's an area of land that's going to drain into that body of water. So it may just be the lawn that's surrounding it, or maybe it's the hills on either side of that stream. But every little body of water has a watershed. So when we talk about the Hudson River watershed, we're talking about a tremendous area because there are a huge amount of tributaries that contribute their water to the Hudson River. And I happen to have a little visual aid right here to tell us a little bit more about the Hudson River watershed. And I'll try to stay out of the frame so you guys can see it. There are the words, Hudson River watershed. And here is the area of land. All that green and brown area, if it rains or snows or sleets in that area, it's going to run downhill into our Hudson River. Another way to think about a watershed is kind of like a bathtub, right? So this entire green and brown area is going to drain its water down into the Hudson River. So the Hudson River is kind of like the drain on the bathtub that is this entire area. And you can see, if I can show you up close, you can see all the little tributaries, streams, and creeks that add their water to the Hudson River. One of the major tributaries is the Mohawk, and that's running down over here from western New York down into the Hudson River right over here. Sorry, I'm trying to do this backwards, okay? So now Troy, right here, the town of Troy, that's where the estuary begins. So all the way down here, you're gonna have tides, okay? Now you won't have salt water in that entire area. Salt water really only goes maybe this far north up to, say, Newburgh, Beacon, Cold Spring area. So everywhere up here is gonna be fresh water, but it is still tidal, okay? Until you get to Troy. Where are you, Troy? Right there. Okay, until you get to Troy. And then everything above that is a river, all right? It will travel in one direction. That direction is downhill, and that water is fresh. So way up here in the Adirondacks, you can see Mount Marcy, and at the base of Mount Marcy is Lake Tier of the Clouds, and that's the highest point on the Hudson River. We call this the headwaters of the Hudson River, and it's where we can trace the beginning of the Hudson River as it travels down through the Adirondacks and gets to Albany and on down to New York City. I'm getting there, New York City, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. Now you might be saying, wow, these borders are kind of weird. Why is the watershed this strange shape? Well, again, it all has to do with gravity, right? Water travels downhill. So these border areas are high ground. They're mountains or hills. And if you were standing on the top of this mountain and you poured water down each side, water would travel down this side into a different watershed, or it would travel down this side of the mountain into the Hudson River watershed, all right? So a watershed doesn't really respect the political boundaries that we humans have set up. And you can see that there's a little tiny bit of the watershed here in Massachusetts. There's a little bit in Vermont, all right? If you come over here, there's a tiny little bit in Connecticut, and then all the way down here we got some of the watershed in New Jersey, right? So when you're talking about pollution issues, you have to remember that even though New York may have strong pollution protections, part of the Hudson River watershed is in Vermont and Massachusetts and Connecticut. So whatever they're doing to the water up here in Vermont is going to affect us down here in the Hudson River. Okay, so this is our map of the watershed, and this is where the fresh water comes into the estuary ecosystem. right, now let's give you another little view there. Okay, our Hudson River watershed. And just to end, let's listen to the creek a little bit more.